Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Portals. It's an absolute pleasure to see all of you and to welcome you for this evening's event. My name is Lori Wong, and I'm a senior lecturer here at the Portals. And I wanted to give the initial introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Sujata Nigama, who's going to introduce tonight's speakers and the event this evening. So for those of you who don't know about who I am and who Sujata is, we teach here at the Courtauld, and we are part of the Robert H. and Ho Family Foundation, which focuses on the art history and conservation of Buddhist heritage. So this center arranges public events, such as the research forum event that we have tonight. We also have an MA program, and some of our past students and our current students are on this program, and this is a 12-month MA program that actually is interdisciplinary. So it combines art history and conservation, and it looks at the study of art history and conservation of Buddhist heritage. And we have some brochures if you're interested in this program. So with that, I am going to hand over to my colleague, Sujata Nigama. So thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sujata Nigama, and I teach Buddhist art history here at the Courtauld. And I too want to warmly welcome all of you to tonight's event. Today, we are celebrating two exhibitions on Southeast Asian art in the United Kingdom. For those of us who have lived and worked in Southeast Asia, this is a very rare occasion to have two exhibitions happening at the same time. And we have two special guests tonight to talk to us about these two amazing exhibitions, one at the British Museum, one at the National Museums in Scotland. And the format for tonight is that we will have both curators speak for about 10 minutes each about their exhibitions, and then we'll have a conversation between curators and myself, and then we'll open up the forum to have some questions from all of you. And starting us off today is Dr. Alexandra Green, who is the Henry Ginsburg Curator for Southeast Asia in the Department of Asia at the British Museum, and she is the lead curator for Burma to Myanmar. Alex has published numerous books and articles. I also have the privilege of seeing one of the exhibitions in Singapore, Raffles, in Southeast Asia, which was also at the British Museum, and after was at the Asian Civilisations Museum in Singapore. She has two new publications, and I believe she'll share that with you all during her presentation. And in addition to Alex, I also want to welcome Rosanna and Nicolson, who's come all the way down from Edinburgh to be with us tonight. She is the assistant curator, West, South, and Southeast Asia in the Department of Global Arts, Cultures, and Design at National Museum Scotland. And she has curated an exhibition on Theravada Buddhism, which opened in September and will be on till June of next year. And she'll be speaking to us more about this exhibition tonight in her presentation. So please join me in welcoming Alex and Rosanna for tonight's event.
Thank you very much to Lori and Sujata for inviting me here this evening. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope everybody will come and see the exhibition, Burma to Myanmar, at the British Museum. This exhibition has been quite a long time in the making, and there are a number of themes that I felt were very important to feed into this exhibition. It's happening this year, which is a fantastic year to have the exhibition on, because it's the 75th anniversary of Myanmar's independence from British colonial control. which happened in 1948. So it's good timing. And one of the things I wanted to do is overturn a number of myths that we have about Myanmar. One is that it's an isolated space, and indeed it has been isolated since the military coup in 1962, which set it on the Burmese path to socialism and isolated it from the world around it. But historically, isolation has not been the case. So this fantastic UNESCO Memory of the World object, which I'm absolutely thrilled to have in the exhibition, coming from the Leibniz Library in Hanover, is the golden letter written by King Alangpaya to King George II in 1756. And it absolutely fabulously encapsulates what I'm trying to do in this exhibition. So all the objects in the show have been very specifically chosen to represent cross-cultural interactions. So it's not sort of a potted history of Myanmar. It's very much looking at Myanmar's history through the lens of cross-cultural engagement. And a letter from King Alangpaya, who had just 4 years before this letter founded the Konbaung dynasty in central Myanmar. He was part of a very large and expanding empire. I think in everybody's efforts to focus on the British Empire, and we should absolutely, we tend to forget that there are other empires out there, and certainly in the late 1750s, Myanmar was a very powerful entity indeed. And this letter is basically King Alangpaya introducing himself to King George as equals, and he's hoping to start diplomatic connections between the two kingdoms. Unfortunately, George never responded. He merely sent it to his personal library in Hanover because, of course, George I and George II were German. So it ended up, instead of in the UK, in Germany. The other important theme, so we're looking at cross-cultural interaction, we're looking at the Burmese Empire. So it's a very powerful entity. But the other thing I want to, kind of myth I'd like to overturn is the idea that developing countries aren't necessarily poor. Usually they aren't poor, their resources are just very poorly distributed, and that is absolutely the case with Myanmar. It is a phenomenally wealthy country. As I said, its resources are just poorly distributed. So this letter is written on gold and set with 24 Burmese rubies. It's giving you a very good sense of that wealth of the kingdom. The other thing that's very important to know about Myanmar is that it's an incredibly diverse space. And so the question has been how do you represent diversity and multiplicity without privileging the majority? And I've done that in the show by looking at how it functioned historically. So Myanmar in the current shape only was formed in 1948. Prior to 1948, it was separate kingdoms, separate political entities, and so what we've done is we've pulled the country apart into 5 separate sections. You can see this. On the west, here Arakan, we've got the Kingdom of Bago in lower Myanmar, you've got the Shan states up in the east, and then in this mountainous ring around the country, you have a myriad of different ethnic groups, and so then we talk about the highland regions, and of course the central Myanmar, from which the Burman Buddhist majority springs, and who've become the dominant ethnic group in the area today. So again, we're accomplishing many, many different things through this exhibition. So in dividing it up, so I have 5 images, one from each of the sections, and again, each of these looking at each section historically and also cross-culturally. So for Arakan, we have, obviously there are a whole number of objects, but this one that I pulled out is a coin issued by King Dhamaraja Hussain in 1612 to 1622. It's written on the left in Arakanese and on the right in Persian using Arabic script, and then also in Bengali at the bottom. And these are coins where they were used for trade, and it was very important that the king was able to communicate cross-culturally because Arakan was a very important trading kingdom. And it was at the height of its power in the 17th century, and so the king is not only speaking to all the different communities within his territory, because Muslims and Bengalis were there from very early times, and but also it's used by ships coming across the Bay of Bengal and across the Indian Ocean. So again, a fantastic example of a king kind of at the top of his game, communicating very, very broadly. Lower Myanmar, another very powerful trading kingdom. It had its zenith between the 1450s and kind of the 1530s when central Myanmar came down and took it over. Periodically, they threw off the central Burmese yoke, but there was a lot of back and forth between the two. But one of the things that Lower Myanmar was particularly, the Kingdom of Bago was particularly known for was its storage jars, which were produced at two sites, Martaban, and Twante. And we know from a Moroccan trader writings of 1350 that these jars were very popularly used on ships from all over, not just from the region. And at Twante, you get them with a greenish glaze like this. Those from Motama have a kind of chocolate brown glaze, but they were used to hold food and water on ships as well as to store goods that were being traded. So very important from a really early date. The Shan states. So one of the things to know about Southeast Asia is that hard borders are, again, a recent invention. And actually, historically, Southeast Asia has been underpopulated. So warfare and military clashes were not so much about taking somebody else's territory and annexing it to you. There was plenty of territory. You didn't have the people to work it. So oftentimes warfare was about going out and bringing people from over there back to your heartland over here and settling them and having them pay taxes to you. And it's not plantation-style slavery that you brought everybody over and you kind of stuck them working on the land. It's very much, you're a silversmith over here, well, you could be resettled as a silversmith here. Over there, and you were resettled as a silversmith here. So this is when hard borders started coming in, oftentimes that separated out people who had been strongly connected through diplomacy, through trade, and also ethnically related groups. So this is a map produced in the 1880s when the British and the Chinese were establishing a hard border along what is today northern Shan State in Myanmar. And the yellow was one of the Shan principalities. So there were a number of principalities that waxed and waned over time, relating to each other diplomatically through trade and also through marriage, and also, of course, fighting with each other. But the yellow is Mong Mao, the red is the Principality of Nam Kam, the black bit there is another principality called Ceylon. Ceylon was a tributary of Nam Kam. But when the border happened, then suddenly Mong Mao, the yellow, became part of China. So it's part of Yunnan province in China, and the other two remained as part of Myanmar. But the hard border, of course, interrupted the trade that was going through this region, and then, of course, also, as I said, severing other connections as well. And then for the highland areas, this is a fabulous photograph of a Kachin chief, Malama, and he's wearing a Chinese court robe with a Burmese skirt cloth. He smokes a Shan pipe, of a type that's used around the region, and he's wearing both a Kachin and a Kachin and a Chinese turban on his head. What's important about this is that in highland regions, it wasn't state-based. It was very much about cross-cultural interactions, and your authority is expressed by your ability to work cross-culturally. So he hasn't cobbled together these clothes. He's demonstrating the extent of his diplomatic and cross-cultural engagement. So he can deal with the Chinese court. He can deal with the Burmese court. And in the highland regions, they were controlling, the peoples there were controlling mountain passes. So they very much were the intermediaries in diplomatic relationships between Burma and China and Thailand as well as controlling trade. So although non-state-based, they were extremely powerful. And then, of course, central Myanmar. That's the majority of the material that you find in the UK. It's been very heavily collected. So I decided to focus on a specific event, and this is the 1767 attack on the central Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya. And the Central Burmese army scooped up all these people from Ayutthaya and brought them back. And one of the groups that they brought back were Thai theatrical troops. who then took the court by storm. They absolutely loved the Thai theater, and suddenly stories like the Ramayana, which were known in central Myanmar before, but they suddenly became particularly popular after 1767, and indeed the Burmese actually redesigned formal court dress based on these Thai theatrical costumes. So we get, again, phenomenal cross-cultural flows back and forth. Then we move to the colonial period, and again, there's so much one can say, and it was a matter of sort of distilling what to focus on. So we have sections where we look at changes in religion, including the advent of Christianity. We look at the development of things like, the arrival of Western goods and advertising, the development of the film industry, but we also look at the impact of European ideas and Europeans on art and design. And this is a fabulous ivory chair that obviously has a very European shape. It has sort of distorted claw feet, obviously a derivation of the European style. But then the carving on it is just amazingly done in a very typical Central Burmese style. So it's absolutely an amazing, the picture doesn't do it justice. It's an absolutely amazing piece. And then we also look at new communities and the development of ethnic issues. So ethnicity in Southeast Asia has traditionally been very flexible, and one of the things that's happened with the British arrival is that they imposed a census, and suddenly ethnicity couldn't be flexible. You had to choose, I'm Karen, I'm Kachin. And this set the stage for the conflicts of today as ethnic identity became something very rigid. And then finally we turn to the after independence, and again there's a huge amount one can say. So we focus on 4 major figures who loomed large on the world stage, including U Nu, the first prime minister, obviously General Ne Win, who set the country on that path to socialism, and Aung San Suu Kyi. And then we look at the conditions that people suffered under during the military dictatorships, the various military dictatorships that have happened. And we also, again, explore ideas of ethnicity today. And so we look at the Rohingya genocide. Obviously, nothing happens in depth because it's a small exhibition, but we have at least a little bit on the genocide. We look at how ethnic groups are trying to homogenize themselves as a pushback against the homogenization efforts of the military junta that's trying to make everybody Burman Buddhist. And then we end with the 2021 coup, and we've been fortunate enough to get images that are being projected on the sides of buildings as a form of resistance. Through various channels, we were able to acquire some of those images, and so we project those at the end of the show. Again, focusing on sort of cross-cultural, so one of the cross-cultural engagement, so one of the images that you get over and over again is the 3-fingered salute from the Hunger Games, which has then been picked up by pro-democracy protesters all across Asia. And then becomes obviously particularly poignant here in Myanmar, that's so isolated. So that's a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of the exhibition. Do come and see it. There is a book catalog that goes with it, and then of course also this year we've put out a Southeast Asia History and Objects, which explores the British Museum's collections, and we'll be discussing collecting in a little bit, I think. But then we also have that. So thank you very much.
Thank you again to Laurie and Sujata for inviting me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here and to share one of National Museum Scotland's latest exhibitions with you. So as Sujata mentioned, Theravada Buddhism opened in mid-September and will be on until next June, so please do come to Edinburgh and see it. It's also on a small scale, but we've still managed to do some kind of new and exciting things that we don't normally do with these spaces. So I will just, give you a brief overview, and we can talk about it more in the discussion, because there's always a lot more background work and research that goes into exhibitions that's not always visible in the finished product. So just to give you a sense of museum and the space, in case you've not been before. So this is the Grand Gallery, or the main hall. So the special exhibition space is in just off it in a kind of arched hallway. So we've got 4 cases and then a special loan from a local Thai temple, which has become a kind of focal point. But it also means that the exhibition is very visible compared to some of our other temporary spaces. It's not kind of tucked away or hidden, so it's got good visibility. And we've also gone for a very colourful design, so I think that's drawing people in, which is great. So the exhibition itself includes about 40 objects from our South and Southeast Asian collections, which aren't normally on display. We've got very little material from the area in our permanent galleries. So this has been a fantastic opportunity to get some things out of storage that aren't, people don't necessarily know we have or are seen. And it's come out of work with the local community, as I mentioned, and also Edinburgh University. In 2019, they set up a research network called Edinburgh Buddhist Studies. So that prompted us to review our collections, and we've been working quite closely with them as well. So this is really a kind of an outcome of the work that's been going on with these different community partners and the university over the last 5 years or so. So it really charts the history and influence of Theravada Buddhism, and especially in Scotland today as well. And because of the location of the gallery, we can't do a kind of linear narrative. People come into it from multiple different points of entry, so it's quite difficult. So we've kind of grouped it thematically. So we've got one side which is more the kind of contextual historical information, introducing the origins of Buddhism, the stories and narratives, and introducing the historical Buddha as well. And then the other half has become more about practice, living Buddhism, personal devotion. So I'll just run through the cases, and then we've got these kind of long banners on the columns either side of them, which we've kind of related thematically. So we've kind of pitched this one as the first case, and we've called it Origins of Buddhism, and we've linked it to nature. I was particularly interested in how nature comes through really strongly in these early narratives and origin stories of the Buddha's awakening. So we've got a stone carving from India, which shows the earth goddess. Again, you can't see it on this picture, but the earth goddess is at the base. And then we've got 2 naga or snake images. And then we've also got some clay offerings from the Mahabodhi temple at Bodh Gaya. So it's kind of setting the scene with this one. And then, linking it through to the narratives about trees and snakes and the earth goddess. And then in case 2, we move on to introduce the historical Buddha a bit more. So we've got 3 pieces, a Gandharam piece, which is the story of the Bodhisattva in a past life and his vow to Buddhahood. And then we have a reclining figure, which is symbolizing the death of the Buddha, and then the standing figure from Indonesia is Maitreya, as kind of the Buddha to come in the future. So it's just trying to introduce the concept that there's more than one Buddha, I suppose. But we've generally in the exhibition steered away too much from doctrine and too much theology and tried to keep it about practice and what people do, but we obviously needed to set some context here. And then this is where we're moving into the other side of the exhibition. And we've got a case about relics, stupas and temples. So I wanted to kind of bring a sense of place and thinking about the architecture and the spaces that the Buddhists would go to. So we've got the spinning gongs, which we managed to hang in the case, which was great. And we were able to have a go at playing them and recording them, which is not something that we would normally do with objects in our collection, but we worked with a percussionist from the Royal Conservatoire in Glasgow, and I can play you the video of the results. So we've got the speaker localized above the case, and I think having the audio really adds an extra element to the exhibition, and we've linked it to a panel behind it about sensory Buddhism. So this again was trying to think about temples and the kind of sacred spaces and the things that you would hear or other sense, what you would smell or see, to kind of bring an element of that in too. And then the final case is a double case, which we've titled Merit and Offerings. So I kind of tried to fit as much in as I could just to show the range of different materials and different images that were being made and offered. So we've got a group which is mainly clay, and then another group which is the silver wrapped images on a kind of a clay or a resin base with a very thin layer of pure silver around them. And then we also have some amulets, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And we linked this into other themes around it on Buddhist cosmology and meditation and things like that, just to bring in more of the practice side and how the objects fit in with things like making merit. So gaining merit or virtue so that you can ensure a better rebirth. So really focusing on the materiality. Again, I wanted to challenge some kind of perhaps preconceptions that people have that Buddhism is, a non-material religion, and in fact, these objects, they're so central to what people do. So just really focusing on the materiality of that. And then at the very heart of the exhibition really is this special loan from a local Thai Buddhist temple in Edinburgh. So this is the first time that the museum has worked with a religious organisation in this way, and to be able to borrow one of their sacred objects has been a great privilege. So just to give you a bit more information about the temple, it started out as the Thai Scottish Association and was formed in the wake of the 2004 Asian tsunami to raise money. But by 2014 it had become the Dharmapadita Temple, which is a converted 3-bedroom house. And they have 3 monks living there. The temples very much promotes that they're open to everybody, regardless of faith or nationality, and they run yoga and meditation classes, as well as larger annual cultural celebrations. And the Buddha image that they've loaned was commissioned and made in Thailand in 2013. It was commissioned by the owner of the Nong Nuk Pattaya Botanical Gardens, which is just south of Bangkok. And it clearly takes inspiration from one of the most revered images in Buddha images in Thailand. And you can see it's flanked by protective guardian figures, and the sparkling surround is to represent the light emanating from the Buddha. It was brought to the UK in 2015 and then gifted to the temple in Edinburgh, where they use it in their garden meditation room. So it's not their main image, main shrine. And we felt it was really important to include a picture of it as it is normally in the temple on the label, so that people know what it looks like within its kind of sacred or religious context, as opposed to in the museum. But it's a very striking object, and it is drawing people in from across the museum into the gallery. And for that reason, we kind of used the columns either side of it to really frame the exhibition. So that's where the main gallery intro is. And then we also have a panel talking about different uses of Buddha imagery, both in secular and religious contexts. And I thought I would just put the text up, and it would be interesting to know your thoughts on it and how you would respond to that as a visitor. So we kind of, contrasted the fact that the image of the Buddha has become used in the West as a kind of consumer products, garden ornaments, yoga studios, T-shirts, slogans, colouring books, and whereas for Buddhists, images of the Buddha are, sacred and they must be treated with respect. So we wanted visitors to think about, do they have images of the Buddha in their own homes and gardens? How are they displayed? Why do they have them? And to kind of relate that back to how they're displayed in temples and in sacred contexts. And we also thought it was really important to mark the transition of this loan from the temple to the museum, obviously temporarily. So in consultation with the temple, we organised a kind of welcoming ceremony. So the monks came along with a group of their supporters. This was before the museum opened to the public, and they performed a blessing and some chanting in front of the loan before presenting the museum with a gift, which it was from their headquarters in Thailand, and it's a replica of one of the stupas at that temple, which was specifically made earlier this year to be given to monks stationed overseas. But then they chose to give that to the museum, which is a real sign of the work that we've been doing and the relationship we've developed for the exhibition. So that will go into our permanent collection. And as I briefly mentioned before, the amulets and coins in the final case, the temple helped us purchase these in Thailand specifically for the exhibition. So yeah, they were chosen knowing that they would be on display and in a museum collection, so they're not the most spiritually potent or financially valuable ones, but they're still a great representation of a very popular item and an object that is used and traded, and they're made for all sorts of different occasions, to raise money for building a temple or to commemorate respected monks. So the abbot was particularly delighted that we chose to put this one on display because it was in commemoration of his preceptor and the person who sent him to Edinburgh. There's a kind of interesting link and story there, which is very rooted in Edinburgh and the relationship between Edinburgh and Thailand. So I think I will leave it there, and I'm sure that we'll talk more in the discussion, so thank you.
Thank you, Alex and Rosanna, for sharing with us your amazing exhibitions. And I'd like to invite both of you to the table to continue our discussion about curating and collecting and curating Southeast Asian art as well as sacred objects. And then we'll open up questions. Wanted to start off by briefly sort of responding to the presentations, and I was struck out by the fact, Alex, that you took sort of a different approach from, let's say, the exhibition on Burmese art at the Asian Society Galleries in 2015, which took a very sort of religious or Buddhist approach, and you highlight the cross-cultural exchanges and sort of locate Burma and Myanmar within sort of a transcultural or transnational perspective, engaging with global art histories, or what we might also call connecting art histories. And I'm also really struck by your exhibition on Theravada Buddhism, Rosanna. And the last exhibition, I guess we can think of as a sort of a Buddhist art exhibition, was the one in 2019 at the British Library. And here you take a really interesting approach, focusing on practice and bringing attention to the fact that most of the objects that we teach and we curate and showcase exist in these other sort of sensory spaces. And So it got me thinking about a couple of questions that we at the center and in our MA program are concerned with, which is, of course, how are these collections, how performed, and perhaps I was wondering whether we could think a little bit more about the collecting practices of the two institutions, of course, in regards to the objects that are currently on display in both exhibitions, briefly, if that seems possible.
Great, thank you very much for the question. So one of the things that I didn't have time to mention is that even before COVID and the coup and cost of living crisis, I had already planned to borrow almost entirely from UK collections for the exhibition, precisely because objects are actually a major, they're very important in cross-cultural or just any sort of interactions. I mean, you go to somebody's house and you bring them, a little gift. And so these things are actually really important in not only in colonial histories, but in just general histories as well. So I felt that that was particularly important to bring out. In terms of how things were collected, we have in the exhibition put provenance front and center. So you have the name of the object, you have the caption, and then you have the provenance. And again, one of the things I wanted to do by doing that was to make it very clear that objects move around. In a sense, they have their own lives. And oftentimes that movement gives us a real sense, again, of cross-cultural interactions. So one of the things is we get a sense of how, the World Museum acquired things. We get a sense, in Liverpool, we get a sense of how the Brighton Museum acquired things. In terms of the British Museum, Southeast Asian collections, they follow colonial history very closely. So if the British colonized it, we have quite a lot of material from that area. If the British didn't colonize it, we don't actually have that much material from those areas. In terms of Myanmar, I have written an article on the formation of the Burmese collection that was published in 2015 in the Journal of the History of Collections. And the Burma collection is quite interesting. You think with so many having been colonized for such a long time, you would think there was actually quite a lot of sort of academic interest that arose, but actually there wasn't very much. And it turns out that our collections are very strongly formed by people picking up souvenirs. So, somebody would go and, oh, there are Buddha images, we'll have 2 or 3 of those. And somebody else would pick up 2 or 3 textiles. So it's actually really kind of a mishmash of stuff. Obviously, other collections are different, but I can go on forever, so I'll stop and let Rosanna have some.
Well, yeah, I think our collection is similar in the sense that it's come through colonial military roots, Scots who are living and working abroad and bringing things back with them. So yeah, and it's not something that we've actively ever collected. So it's kind of more incidental and a bit more random, I suppose. But things were coming in right from the beginning. The museum was opened in the 1850s, but kind of amalgamated some earlier collections into it. So from the university, the Royal Society, and the Society of Antiquaries and things like that. So you are seeing things come in throughout the whole period, but yeah, it's very, very much through the kind of colonial network predominantly. But it's obviously been nice for this exhibition to use it to acquire some contemporary material that then speaks to the historical material as well. As part of putting the exhibition on, we obviously had to do a lot of research and due diligence on the provenance of these objects. So it was good to look into a couple where, at first look, it doesn't sound great, but then you look into it a bit more and you're kind of really revealing these connections and histories, colonial histories. Or, we have some of the silver wrap Buddhas. It was a coin collector, and he was interested in precious metals, nothing to do with Buddhism. So there's sometimes some unexpected ways that things come in as well. And because we've got very little on display, it's just been great to kind of look into that part of the collection more. We've never had a specialist So this has just, been a great way to look at it in focus.
Thank you. I mean, it's really interesting to hear that provenance is something that you are both highlighting in these exhibitions and getting us to think about collecting practices and especially with the objects that you are showcasing in these two exhibitions. And something else that was very striking, I guess, with your presentation, Rosanna, was of course the curating of sacred objects. Not only the objects that are, I guess, that were perhaps used in the past and then collected by those who were traveling through Southeast Asia, but also objects that are currently being used as well. And I understand with your exhibition as well, Alex, that you do have a few pieces that, of course, reflect Buddhism in Myanmar. And I'm just wondering whether you can also speak a little bit more about curating sacred objects.
So we do have Buddha images and some sacred, Buddhist sacred objects in the exhibition. We also have a Christian Bible, and we also have some Muslim material as well. So it's not only Buddhism, because again, one of the things we're trying to do is to show the diversity of Myanmar without privileging anybody. But that said, in a sense, they aren't in there as religious objects, in that we're not explaining them, how they function within the religion. We're using them as a means to talk about, again, cross-cultural interactions. So, for example, we have a wonderful gold stupa reliquary that was unearthed in what is today Yangon, but back in 1855 when it was a small town. And it was probably produced in the 15th century, and it indicates a time when the kingdom of Bago was very, very powerful and actually was a major Buddhist center with strong connections to Sri Lanka. So again, the piece isn't we don't talk about stupas, we don't talk about Buddhism like that, but we talk about the rise of the kingdom as a Buddhist center and therefore its strong connections with Sri Lanka and also actually with central Thailand. And again, for the Arakanese section, we have a couple Buddha images in there, but there it's a matter of showing how, talking about how monks traveled up into the Himalayas and interacted with Buddhist art forms there, and then brought back some of those ideas that were then replicated on pieces in Arakan, and then through their connections with central Myanmar and lower Myanmar, then how those actually jewelry forms ended up on images being produced in other parts of the country. So again, it's not so much Buddhism. Obviously, we have tried to be respectful. We haven't put any of the Buddha images down low. And I did have a comment by a practicing Buddhist about this one Buddha image that is there to represent the first Anglo-Burmese War of the 1820s. And she says, normally we have this in the center of the space, you have it kind of in a corner, but actually it was meant to be central, but you had to think about the space as different sections. So in the section it's a long straight shot, and then it's down at the end, but then if you're standing in the center of the whole exhibition hall, then yes, it's off to the side. But actually it was meant to be centered in this one particular area. So again, it's things that you think you're actually doing the right thing, then somehow somebody else comes in as a different perspective, and suddenly it's not quite as right. But obviously she was much happier after I explained to her that it was centered. It just wasn't centered in the space as an entirety. There are obviously different sections in the exhibition.
Yes, working with the temple to make sure. Working with the temple to make sure that they were happy with the way that their object was displayed in the museum was actually really interesting, because if you remember the image of how it is in the temple, it's in their garden meditation room, which is a kind of converted decking area. So the ceiling height is extremely low. So they've actually had to recess the floor to fit it in. And that's obviously, totally against any norms or the desire to, raise Buddha images up. It's actually on the floor. And they acknowledge this and they're aware of it. But when it was then coming to the museum, it was important that we then did respect and have it on a plinth and up higher, and we had the space to do that. So it makes a really interesting contrast that how we've done it in the museum to how they have it in the temple, which definitely got me thinking about museum displays versus the display of Buddha images in temples, because the one in Edinburgh and others will have cabinets surrounding the main shrine or somewhere else in the temple full of different images, and to what extent are they curated, and it's just got me thinking, and it also got me thinking how much does it then make the museum its own sacred space, because the exhibition's often to the side and it's kind of through the archway. Does it then make that space different because you have kind of consecrated Buddha in there? And during install we actually randomly had a passing Sri Lankan monk come and visit, and he removed his shoes before crossing the threshold into the gallery space, and it was kind of interesting to see how people were behaving, and it's something I'd like to monitor throughout the rest of the exhibition as well.
Thank you both for getting us to think about curating sacred objects, and then of course not necessarily privileging one religion over the other. But I'm aware of time, and I'm sure everybody would love to ask questions from you. But perhaps a few words on collaboration. It's interesting how both of you have collaborated with different communities, bringing attention to local voices, indigenous as well as diasporic communities. And I'm wondering whether you can speak to that a little bit more before we open up to questions.
Yeah, so when I was working on the show early on, before lockdown and everything, I did go to Myanmar and talk to the Ministry of Culture and the Department of Archaeology and the various museums, and also some trustees of some Buddhist sites, with an eye to collaborating, and I was hoping to bring somebody over to work with me, sort of co-curate, from one of the national museums. Obviously with the coup, that became completely impossible. We did have a local community group who functioned as an advisory body, and then also I had a Burmese intern who worked with me for quite a long time. Well, actually he's still working with me, though he's no longer an intern. We have him we've gotten a grant, and he's basically employed through this grant. So we have had quite a lot of discussion with local communities. So yeah, it would have been nice to have done more, but obviously the political situation made that impossible.
Yeah, I think the delay for COVID with this exhibition actually allowed us to do a lot more with local communities than we had originally planned. It's not something we normally do with these smaller exhibitions, but through the university and the work I've been doing with them, I was introduced to the temple, and they were so enthusiastic that they offered to lend us something. We didn't approach them in that way. It was the offer came from them, which we were obviously delighted by and very grateful for, because I think it's made a much better exhibition in the end, because we've had more time to kind of establish these relationships and to really to grow them. So there's been a lot of things that I've done with them over the last couple of years, so attending their annual cultural events. They've been to the museum stores and seen what else we have in the collection. I've been to the temple numerous times, and we've worked together on the acquisitions and also translation work. So sadly I couldn't include any kind of paper or manuscripts in the exhibition, but they helped us translate an ordination manuscript, which I would love to put on the website somehow, because they had a contemporary replica made for us, which is amazing, working with a monk in Thailand. But we also reached out to other Thai groups in Scotland as well, but from very different traditions. So it was trying to showcase the diversity of different Buddhist groups in Scotland today. So I think, it's been a really enjoyable project to work on and a great legacy, I think, because of these connections.
Thank you for it. I mean, they're fantastic models also for us to sort of look towards and learn from for future exhibitions and also in our own teaching. But I'm sure there are questions in the audience, so maybe we can have a few questions. A question back there.
Thank you very much. This was wonderful and so interesting to see how entangled is this notion of sacred object and display in museums, which have nothing to do, although museums are like temples nowadays, but that's another matter altogether. I had a question, and thank you for sharing with us. I had a question for Alexandra, if I may, and it's about the notion of cross-cultural in Burma, Myanmar art, and whether this is about multiple cultures and religions. I thought your coin was fantastic, for instance, with all those languages and materials. But does it also tell us something about sort of learning visually or in terms of meanings from one culture into another, or, you know, more in terms of not presence of multiple cultures, but an integral sort of absorption and transformation, let's say, of a taste or a form or an iconography, whatever that might be, that would speak to transculturation?
Yeah, thank you very much for that interesting question. Absolutely. I had sort of 10, 15 minutes to present what we've now written an entire book on. So please do feel free to get the book, where obviously we were able to go into much more detail.
Sorry, that's my fault since I did. That's sort of we missed you out 10 minutes each.
It's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. It gives, you have to give people, I think it's very important to have tasters and then see if it whets your appetite to go further. But yes, so one of the things that I've tried very hard to do is to bring in a wide variety of materials. So it's not, focusing on manuscripts, it's not focusing on Buddha images, it's not focusing on, wood carvings. It's not any one particular material. And the way in which each of the objects is cross-cultural, again, there's no single way that it is that. So for example, the ivory chair that I showed, there we're talking about shape, combination of shape and design. When we're looking at a manuscript, for example, of people playing polo at the Burmese court, then it's very much about how Manipuri cavalry were brought back, obviously from Manipur when the Burmese controlled it, and then became part of the Burmese cavalry, and then although polo was known at court before, then suddenly polo became particularly popular at courts. Then that's a way of representing something that became popular, which is very different from an actual practical use of a European shape for a chair, for example. So we get, again, these very, very different ways in which objects are cross-cultural throughout the exhibition. So I am very particularly pleased with how that has worked out. So yes, and I think it's very important that you talk about design, you talk about ideas. Another thing that we did as part of the preparation for the exhibition is the British Museum holds a very good collection of Karen textiles, and we tested 6 that came into the museum over the course of the 19th century for the advent of synthetic dyes and fibers. And so we were able to see, again, that one of the things, again, that I was trying to do in the exhibition is to show that remote areas, what we consider remote today, were not necessarily remote. And suddenly we're seeing synthetics being invented in Europe in the 1850s, and by the early 1860s, they're already in so-called remote areas. So again, another way in which there are cross-cultural interactions, and women are then combining synthetics and natural dyes. So there are multiple ways, and instead of then talking about those specifically, I've just dropped them in throughout the exhibition, and in kind of a subtle way for people to pick up, and presumably they have, well, hopefully they will have done so. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, I can. Yeah, no worries. So first, I need to show my respect to the and appreciation to our curator of the Scotland National Museum, because I just visited there this August, and I just and the skinny corridor overall composition give me a very strong impression, and I really think it's like on one hand you cannot really play the wild game like the Simsbury galleries in the East Anglia University, kind of like arrange a Cambodian Buddha next to Francis Bacon's painting. On the other hand, it's the spatial distribution is not that ideal as the Kilgrosvenor Museum. So I think it will be a huge puzzle for you to design a kind of even a small scale exhibition in just based on that corridor, rather than waiting for another chance to organize a larger exhibition in the temporary exhibition space. So I really appreciate your work. It's quite amazing. And second, I have a question to our Dr. Green. I have been to visit that exhibition with my friend, and I noticed there are a lot of vessels have the idiom of the zodiac. It have the zodiac really close to the Western prototype, and also have the Chinese zodiac, and have their the Burmese kind of localized zodiac. I mean, as you said, it's really the kind of a cultural interaction hub of different culture. Can you explain more of those kind of the zodiac iconography in Burma?
So two zodiacs, they use both the Chinese zodiac, the annual, it's the year of the sheep, the year of the snake, the year of the dog, but then they also use the Western, well, what we think of as the Western, but actually it's been across, the Eurasian continent for a very long time, the so-called Western zodiac, with some slightly different animals. So for example, Capricorn, instead of being a goat, is an elephant-headed fish. And I've been quite interested in the elephant-headed fish for a while, though I haven't managed to do any research. But actually, if you go back to Roman mosaics, representation of, you get this representation of a goat-headed fish. And so clearly, elephants have much stronger connection in Southeast Asia than goats do. So you've ended up with this goat-headed fish. So clearly, this is, a motif that has then traveled across the Eurasian continent and then been adapted for local use. And I do talk about that a lot in the exhibition, where you have objects that are drawing from all over the place, but then are creating something that they're not copying. You're exploring the world around you, and you're bringing things together to produce something that's very clearly from sort of your time and place. And I think that process by which humans engage with the world around them is particularly interesting. So the zodiac is, yes, a very good example of that. So,
I believe there was another question at the back.
Hi, thank you so much. It was very satisfying to see museums take in a lot of changes and then, putting in the decolonization in action. So it makes me very happy personally. And I have a question about what we're noticing on the mainstream in literature and also curation about own voices, and being very aware about who's presenting the stories about the global majority. And as a South Asian studying Southeast Asian art, I ask this question a lot to myself, and I wanted to ask that to you as well. What are some of the questions that we should be asking as people from another culture presenting really important information about Southeast Asia or any other region of the world? And what do you think are some questions that are not asked? Because I really understand that there are a lot of limitations as well. So that's the question that I have. And once again, I know there's never a direct answer to it, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh, yes, thank you very much for the question. Absolutely. I think when you do as much sort of engagement with local communities as Rosanna and I have done, then in a sense, although we end up being the public faces because we're then the employees of the museum, actually these sorts of efforts are just hugely, it just involves so many people. So, I mean, I know I'm the person talking about it, but I mean, there were probably 10 conservators who are working on the exhibition. You have, you know, all the marketing team, you've got the interpretation team, you know, the director of the museum read the labels. So again, it's, as I said, we're the ones standing here talking about it, but actually it's been a huge number of people who have been engaged with it, and that's both internal and external. In terms of the this particular exhibition that I've been working, you know, the Burma to Myanmar exhibition, I was very keen to engage with local communities and, of course, with communities in Myanmar. And one of the things I particularly wanted to do for this show, in a sense, I designed it for a UK audience. Myanmar was a very important colony for the British, and yet today in the UK, very, very few people know anything about it. And I thought that it was very important to kind of overturn that. In addition, I really didn't want to privilege the Burman Buddhist majority, who make up about 60, some odd 70% of the country. So in some instances, if you're trying to do an overview, and again, with our Burmese community, we try to get in as many different ethnic groups as possible. I think, you know, sometimes an outside perspective when you're trying to get an overview of a very contentious situation, which ethnic relationships are in Myanmar, then sometimes it's quite good to have an outside perspective. An internal perspective isn't always, you know, necessarily the best way to go. You end up not necessarily privileging. But as I said, my focus really was on helping people in the UK to understand Myanmar, to understand that it's one of the largest empires in Southeast Asia, that it's an extremely wealthy area, that it was a very important colony for the British, even though it was subsumed under the British Raj, under the Indian Raj for, you know, most of its colonial history, and then again to engage. So by pulling together all these strands, I'm hoping that it addresses, you know, what the theme that you're talking about.
Yes, I mean, some very similar experiences there, but yeah, it's something that we thought a lot about. We worked with an external freelance interpretation specialist, as well as obviously the university and the local communities. We tried to figure out how we could, separate out almost the curatorial voice and then have space for other voices. And it didn't necessarily work in the ways that I hoped it would or I wanted it to, because of the fact that there are just so many people involved. It's really difficult to overturn sometimes the museum style or the museum voice, even though that there is a lot of input from other people. We kind of had separate panels where we could use quotes so that it was very clear where it was a different voice. But yeah, it was something that it didn't quite work in the way I thought it could do, but I definitely think we were able to do better or more than we've done in other spaces. So, yeah.
Thank you both. It's nearly 6:45, and maybe we can continue this conversation over drinks in the research seminar room. Or did I see another hand go up? Amal, yes?
Yes.
Okay, just one last question.
Yeah, hi, thanks to Laurie and Sujata for putting this together, and obviously to Alexandra and Rosanna for presenting today. I thought that was, both presentations were really remarkable. So my question is somewhat more towards aiming to the future, and I appreciate what Alexandra said about trying to bring the story of Myanmar, Burma to Myanmar to a British audience. I guess in Rosanna's case also it's about a story of bringing Theravada Buddhism to British audiences. So I'm wondering, for example, in the case of Theravada Buddhism, there are British Buddhists here who don't have that, shall we say, diasporic connection to Buddhism. And I'm just wondering what feedback or message you're getting from actually British people about the Theravada Buddhism experience and exhibition you've got, and what happens in the future for these kinds of exhibitions for audiences here.
Thank you. What I didn't have time to talk about was that one of the individuals or community members that we worked with was a nun who lives in kind of rural Scotland and runs a hermitage, but she's originally from Edinburgh, and she is one of the kind of these Western traditions of the Tall Forest tradition. So that's been really interesting working with her. So that's a different kind of connection from a British perspective. But in terms of feedback from other visitors or audiences, we haven't got that yet. Sadly, we don't have a comments book in the exhibition, but other traditions are represented in the permanent displays. So we do refer people, if they're looking to kind of compare and contrast different traditions from different regions, then they've got the permanent galleries to go to as well. So yes, it's one tradition, but it's kind of in balance with some of the permanent displays we have. And we're also aware that meditation and mindfulness, they're very much part of popular culture, and that people will have travelled to Southeast Asia, and that it's taught in schools as well. So there's kind of multiple different audiences that might have a kind of vested interest in the exhibition, and we hope that for the remainder of the run we get more engagement from people on it and get some specific feedback, which would be really useful for us. And in terms of the kind of legacy or the future beyond just a temporary exhibition, we've obviously generated a lot of new knowledge that will go into our catalogue and the records and documentation that we keep for these objects. Things, translations and new acquisitions, and then that's there then as a record for the future, and we will continue to work with these communities. Just when the exhibition finishes, that's not the end, and we'll continue to work with them. So it's just I guess quite new for us working with the temple in this way. So I think definitely building on that relationship going forward and with other similar groups would be brilliant.
Thank you to both of you for this wonderful evening and helping us think a little bit more about collecting and curating Southeast Asian art and sacred objects. And thank you also to the audience for your thought-provoking questions. Let's continue talking to each other and our curators in the small drinks reception we have just a few doors down on the same floor. So please join me in thanking Rosanna and Alexandra